Hello and welcome to a special episode of Inside Iraq from George Washington University here in the heart of the American capital. My name is Jassim Azzawi. 4 years ago, President Bush stood in front of a banner proclaiming mission accomplished in Iraq. The shock and awe campaign was brief, and in the haze of victory, promises of democracy and prosperity seemed almost believable. Today, Iraq is teetering on the brink of civil war. Insurgency rages on, and the US is deeply mired, neither able to leave nor to stay in Iraq. Iraq's Pandora box was violently opened. Almost 500,000 Iraqis have died, and 4 million have fled their homeland. Al-Qaeda has established a strong base in Iraq, perhaps permanently, and Iraq's neighbors have watched with trepidation as Iran emerged as the biggest winner in Iraq. Today, we intend to ask some key questions. Was toppling Saddam's regime worth the colossal price for the Iraqis and the Americans? Will the US ever be able to leave Iraq completely without allowing Iran to dominate Iraq and the region? Is the US morally and legally obliged to stabilize Iraq and prevent its disintegration? And perhaps more importantly, why? And what are the lessons to be learned from this American enterprise in Iraq? Here is Kimberly Halkett.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
A statement of victory, mission accomplished. But 4 years on, violence still plagues Iraq, and soldiers and civilians continue to die every day. Since that speech in 2003, more than 3,000 U.S. troops have been killed in Iraq. A report by Johns Hopkins University estimates more than 650,000 Iraqi civilians have died.
Obviously, the statements that the president made on that aircraft carrier with the mission accomplished banner behind him, those are going to be statements and images that he will forever rue. Because I think what happened was that this U.S. presidency, this administration, really had a failure of imagination. A lot of people predicted that after the fall of Baghdad, what you would see is then the real hard fighting would begin.
But back then, President Bush did acknowledge the road ahead would not be smooth.
The transition from dictatorship to democracy will take time, but it is worth every effort. Our coalition will stay until our work is done.
But no one could have foreseen the violence that has ravaged Iraq in the past 4 years. With the troop death toll rising almost daily and a public demand to bring the troops home, George Bush, his administration, and the rest of the government are still struggling to figure out what to do to stabilize Iraq. Some say it could be too late.
No progress has been made, unfortunately. As a matter of fact, Iraq has receded. And I believe that Iraq has receded to a point where no amount of effort that the U.S. military can do at this point is going to bring Iraq back from the brink.
Kimberly Halkett, Al Jazeera.
4 years after that mission accomplished, we intend today to ask some key questions. And to help us answer those and perhaps more from the audience, I am joined by a group of panelists here as well as remotely. PHYLLIS BENNIS is a senior analyst and author. She's with the Institute for Policy Studies. Theodore Qattouf is a former US ambassador and current president of Ahmed East. Khalil Jahshan is a professor of political science from Pepperdine University, and Mark Kimmitt is Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. And from London, we are joined by Tony Benn. He is a current president of the Stop the War Coalition and a former British Member of Parliament. General Kimmitt, let me start with you. The promises were made in 2003. Most of them, they did not materialize. Iraq is teetering on the brink of civil war. The picture is very, very stark and very, very bloody. Were these as a result of a failure of imagination to anticipate the post-war era, or simply something really gone bad that was not anticipated by anybody?
First of all, the mission isn't over. We still have many years, many months, many days left in this mission. So I would not suggest that they haven't panned out. Give it time. We still remain confident that they will pan out.
4 years have gone. Do we still have more time? Do the Americans and the Iraqis have more time, PHYLLIS, BENNIS?
We don't have any more time. More than 650,000 dead. That's the figure as of October of a year and a half ago. That's too much. It was already too much at the time that the war began, let alone when supposedly mission was accomplished. Too many people are dying. The U.S. occupation has to end to give the Iraqis the opportunity to end their war.
It doesn't look that way, Khalil Jashan. The president, just as recent as 2 days ago, he said, we are continuing. We will not withdraw until mission is accomplished.
Well, mission accomplished is in the eye of the beholder. The fact of the matter, this war is basically the story of dreams unfulfilled or objectives unfulfilled. Maybe, as the general said, we might need a little bit more time, but it's kind of beyond that stage. I think at this moment we are paying the price of too many mistakes in terms of preparation for the war, in terms of since the occupation of Iraq, and I'm not sure the declared objective for this mission are fulfillable.
All the more reason, Mr. Ben, there is a legal, perhaps a moral and political obligations for the U.S. to stay as long as possible to put Iraq together. Wouldn't you say so?
No, it was an illegal war, an act of aggression under the UN Charter, an immoral war because so many thousands have died, and an unwinnable war. And if you take the proper historical perspective, Saddam was an ally of the United States in the war against Iran. The British Empire once dominated in the Middle East, and now the American Empire is trying to take over, and it will not succeed. It has nothing to do with democracy. It's about oil and power, and everybody in the world knows that.
If that is the case, Ambassador Qattouf, why two images are emerging? One saying that this is doable, just like General Kimmett said, and many people say it has gone beyond redemption and beyond rehabilitation.
Well, obviously, this is an incredibly polarizing issue, nowhere more than in this country. And we're seeing it now on Capitol Hill between the Democratic Congress and the White House. And the heat is really getting turned up here. The president, I think, is determined to see this through. And I think the Democrats, with a lot of American public support, are more and more determined to try to find an exit strategy for the U.S. along the lines that perhaps was recommended by the bipartisan Baker-Hamilton Commission.
Since a lot of people, PHYLLIS, they are talking about exit strategy perhaps in the next phase, was that exit strategy ever contemplated prior to the war?
I think there were many of us who said from the beginning that this war was not only illegal and immoral, as Tony Benn has just said, but that it was also destined to fail. This was never going to be a war for democracy. It was not waged for democracy. When we talk about the lies, it's not only the lies before the war, weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, links to Al-Qaeda that didn't exist, uranium yellowcake in Niger that didn't exist, et cetera, et cetera. There were the lies during the war, the lies that said that Abu Ghraib was a matter of a few bad apples. You know, the lies that the crisis in Haditha was a matter of so-called self-defense. The lies are continuing. Even today, we're hearing in the hearings in court just last week, the hearing in the Congress just last week, where the families of U.S. soldiers that were killed and injured in Iraq came back and said, we were given false information. So the famous football player, Pat Tillman, whose death in Afghanistan became a symbol of how the family was lied to. They were told that he was brave and heroic. In fact, he was killed under friendly fire. The Jessica Lynch story, where she was made into some sort of false female Rambo and is now coming forward to say, America can choose its own heroes. They don't need to lie to make me a hero. These were lies that continue right up until today. So this is not a war for democracy, and there is no way this war can be won.
Mark Kimmett, we are talking about this now simply because those 4 years, they were horrible. The outcome did not match the anticipation. Had the outcome been different, if Saddam was removed totally in that blitzkrieg and democracy flourished immediately, we would not be here, would we?
Well, I don't think we would. We're talking more of an issue of time rather than outcome. If, as you said, the outcome would have been in the first couple of months, I think everybody, like we saw in Afghanistan, would be applauding it as a new method of war. This one has become more difficult over time, but there has been significant progress made on the ground. You have an elected government in place, ruling all the people in Iraq, speaking for all the people in Iraq, and making the hard decisions for the people of Iraq, while a significant number of people on the ground are trying to reverse that situation.
That perhaps epic battle, Tony Benn, in Iraq between the current Iraqi government and people who are trying to topple it, would you say that what you've seen since we are talking to you from the bastion of democracy, what is in Iraq, according to the Americans, according to the Iraqi government, is your vision of democracy, or it can be totally rehabilitated?
It is conquest. And I was thinking of a parallel. South Africa under apartheid was under a white dictatorship. Would it have ended apartheid if we had bombed Pretoria? Would it have built peace in South Africa if Nelson Mandela had insisted on the execution of Vorster, the white leader? No, of course not. Democracy is what people do for themselves. And to pretend this is about democracy is a complete offense. I mean, I was in the Middle East during the war. I was an RAF pilot in Egypt. And I remember meeting an Egyptian lawyer on the train who said, get out of Egypt. Well, I agreed with him. But we occupied Egypt in 1882 and kept promising to get out, and we didn't get out till 1956. And then we tried to go back again.
Let me go back to Iraq, if I don't mind. But 12 million Iraqis, they braved terrorism, they braved danger, they braved death, and they went and cast their ballots and dipped their fingers in that ink. That counts for something, doesn't it?
Well, my own opinion is that while there is an American occupation, democracy is impossible. I mean, most recently, as you know, there is the hydrocarbon law going through, which will provide for foreign oil companies a very big element in developing in the profit of Iraqi oil. And I mean, let me put it from an American point of view. My wife is an American. I love the real America of Roosevelt and Eisenhower and Abraham Lincoln and so on. But the United States has done enormous damage to itself in the world. I mean, America, far from being seen as the bastion democracy, is now seen as a very aggressive empire. So American influence in the world is diminishing while your weapons get stronger and stronger. So just from an American point of view, it isn't a sensible policy to pursue.
Democracy by force, General Kimmitt.
Oh, I don't think it was democracy by force. I think it was democracy by vote. The presence of the occupation troops, as you would refer to them, the 33 countries that are participating inside, not simply the United States, but 33 countries around the world, protecting those Iraqis who were given a choice. The terrorists said, you vote, you die. The people of Iraq said, we're going to stand up to that threat, and we're going to go to the polling place, and we're going to, for the first time in many, many years, elect our leaders. And those leaders are now making the sovereign decisions for the country of Iraq.
Mark Kimmitt, Iraq is one of the most complex issues that we're facing us right now, and perhaps it's going to face us in the next decades. To understand part of the complexity, here is our second package.
Four years after U.S. forces invaded Iraq, the death toll runs into the tens of thousands, and shocking violence is a daily occurrence.
The facts on the ground are that we've got a civil war on our hands, and it needs to be reconciled. It needs to be resolved.
Amid growing public discontent over American involvement in Iraq, there is a heated debate in the U.S. about what to do.
End the fighting and bring our troops home safely and soon.
Most U.S. legislators want the American troops out of what they call an intractable situation. The president says he's the commander-in-chief and will veto any effort for a U.S. pullout before it's time.
It is wrong for our troops and it's wrong for our country.
His answer is to send in nearly 30,000 additional troops to begin an even tougher crackdown. And then there is the report by the Iraq Study Group led by the former Secretary of State James Baker and former Congressman Lee Hamilton. It states that Iraq's neighbors must be part of the equation.
That support group should include Iraq, of course, but also all of Iraq's neighbors, including Iran and Syria.
Despite the options, there are no easy answers on how to control the violence and political quagmire that plagues Iraq today. Anand Naidu, Al Jazeera.
Iraq, the new Gordian knot that defies any kind of solution. Khalil Jahshan, we were talking about democracy a few minutes ago. 12 million Iraqis voted. What we got now, in the eyes of many, is nothing more than sectarianism institutionalized.
With all due respect to the administration, democracy is not a commodity that can be imported or exported. It has to stem basically from the will of the people. You can easily take a country under occupation and herd.
But it can evolve and can develop with times.
It can definitely evolve and develop, but it needs some work, if you will, to till the ground and make it more receptive for democracy, which we haven't done. We entered this war blindfolded about Iraq, about Iraqi society, what the will of the people in Iraq is all about, what is doable and what's not doable, and therefore we are paying a price for that ignorance we have shown in, first of all, entering this war, two, a war of choice, and two, in terms of entering it with total kind of disregard and condescension toward the will of the Iraqi people.
The trump card in the hands of the administration, PHYLLIS, BENNIS, is this democracy, this 12 million people that went and voted. That's why the US administration is sending more troops in order to protect that investment. This surge, will it help? Will it institutionalize democracy in Iraq?
Absolutely not. There's no question that the 12 million people in Iraq who voted were extraordinarily brave when they held up their finger. It had real symbolism. They wanted to vote, they wanted a democracy, and they voted, ironically enough, overwhelmingly for parties whose representatives said that the first thing they would do if they got elected would be to ask the US troops to leave. Once they got elected and it became clear that the US troops, if nothing else, were keeping them in power, maintaining the green zone, the smidgen of protection that members of the parliament have, the vast majority of parliamentarians these days don't even stay permanently inside Iraq. Half of them are living in Amman because it's simply not safe. And as a result, the US occupation is now functioning as protection of this government, not of the Iraqi people who are paying the price. What a surprise. People got elected on the promise to do one thing and they did something else, as if we've never seen that here. It's very similar. It's the same flaws of democracy that we have here, only on steroids. This is a huge challenge that does not have the capacity, I don't think, to be rectified by sending in more troops to shut down the country as a way of bringing stability.
But this time is going to be different, Mark Kimmett, isn't it? The Iraqi government are providing more troops. The surge is very strong. It's perhaps in full swings. And by August, September, October, we will see some results on the ground?
Well, I think General Petraeus has been very clear. Let's give this a little bit of time. Let's get the troops on the ground. Let's let the Iraqi troops get their feet underneath themselves, particularly in Baghdad. But I want to address something that's been brought up somehow, that there is this sense that there is an illegal occupation. The American soldiers, the coalition soldiers from 33 nations are there under the invitation of the government of Iraq and under a United Nations mandate. Should the government of Iraq say leave, should the United Nations reject that mandate, then we are obliged to leave. And the United States and those countries stand ready to, if told to do so. So this notion that it's an illegal occupation is just ludicrous.
I'm sorry, General. The notion that we can invade a country, occupy that country, install the institutions to create a government, and then say, that government invited us in, is nonsense. The United Nations decision in May of 2003 that you're referring to did not say the invasion was legal. It recognized the US and Great Britain as occupying powers with the goal of insisting that they abide by the requirements of occupying powers that are found in the Geneva Conventions, which have been consistently denied and rejected by the United States. So this notion that somehow the coalition of the coerced, as we call it, there was nothing willing about it, with the exception of Britain and Australia. The coalition of the coerced, which has been contracting enormously, I mean, we're talking about the 47 troops from Moldova, my personal favorites, who are now gone. I mean, the coalition barely exists on the ground. The coalition was there to provide political cover, not because they were needed militarily. This isn't a coalition. This is a US-British occupation. And it's the US and the British that are violating the Geneva Conventions and their obligations as occupying powers.
Tony Benn, the message sent by the US Senate to the President, and that is calling for the US troops to withdraw from Iraq by March, it did not say completely US forces. It says a major bulk of the American forces. The question is, will the US ever leave Iraq? I mean, having invested so much money and shed so much blood, and the credibility is gone, do you ever see that the US will pull its troops lock, stock, and barrel completely?
Are you asking me?
Yes, indeed.
Well, you see, asking me. My opinion is that the war is lost. I think Senator Reid said that the other day, and I remember Vietnam, and Americans remember it even better. The war is lost, but I don't think the United States government has any intention whatever of giving up its bases in Iraq, giving up the Green Zone, which will be a permanent American base, giving up the control of the oil, which is now being transferred under the hydrocarbon law. And you see, a little historical parallel comes to mind. I was born in the British Empire. We locked up Mahatma Gandhi. We locked up Pandit Nehru. Mandela was locked up. The French locked up Ben Bella. Kwame Nkrumah was locked up. And all the people we locked up as terrorists ended up having tea with the Queen as head of Commonwealth countries. Look at Northern Ireland, Gerry Adams, this Irish terrorist. I got into trouble for talking to him.
Let me put this dilemma to General Mark Kimmett. If the U.S., according to Tony Bennett at least, is never going to withdraw from Iraq, perhaps it will draw into safe bases and perhaps go to the north where the Kurds are welcoming it. Will that somehow serve American interest?
Well, first of all, we have never made any public declaration or plan for permanent occupation of Iraq. That is a decision for the Iraqi people to make. It is not a decision for the United States to make. Again, we are there at the invitation of the sovereign government of Iraq. So I can contemplate a day when, yes, there won't be any American forces inside. We would like to have a security relationship with Iraq the same way we have security relationships with all the countries in the region. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we are planning to, as some would suggest, these ludicrous notions of permanent occupation. That is certainly not our plan, certainly not our policy, and certainly not our aspiration.
General Kimmett, we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion. Stay with us.